Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And on the show today, I welcome Rujul Zaparde, founder and CEO of Zip, and Colin Glazier, the VP of Solutions Consulting, also at Zip, in this AOP Live session that we recorded just a couple of weeks ago. Now, usually when we share past AOP Live webinars on the podcast, we typically wait a good couple of months before doing so. However, this conversation is really focused on the here and the now, and so I wanted to share this as soon as I could after we had our original conversation. Now, this AOP Live was titled Forecasting the Future, Executive Predictions for 2023. And Rujul, Colin, my Art of Procurement partner Kelly Barner, and I all shared our thoughts on some of the key themes that procurement will have to navigate through and hopefully be able to take advantage of in 2023. The conversation was broken into three different areas. We talked about the economy, we talked about procurement stakeholder experience, and business alignment. So with that said, let's go straight into the conversation. I'm going to pose this to you because in your role as founder and CEO of Zip, you talk to a lot of organizations, a lot of chief procurement officers every single day. And I'd like to kind of get your perspective from those conversations. What do you think is the confidence horizon across procurement executives right now? So what I mean about that is, how far into the future do you see that procurement, probably driven by their business, are actually kind of planning into the future?
No, that's a very top of mind topic and question. You know, I think candidly, I think the horizon is not so far out. I think there's still a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty in the world. But I would say that, you know, if you were to sort of look at this a year ago this time, it was even more hazy and much less clear. And so I do think that there's a bit more sort of, you know, almost like acceptance of some of the changes. I would say maybe acceptance is the right word in the economy over the last year, and so I think folks have updated their plans. We're headed into, and we're now, you know, inside of a new year, and so I do think that there is a little bit more confidence, but still, just looking out this year, right. I don't think folks really have a strong perspective on 2024 just yet.
Do you find that impacts decision-making and perhaps confidence in making decisions, because folks are not necessarily wanting to put in place long-term plans at the moment, or less likely to want to put in place long-term plans?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the change that, you know, I think we've seen at Zip is, a lot of the CPOs and heads of procurement and finance that we talk to is it's more about checking more frequently, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, look, we'll have a plan, we have goalposts. One thing we know about them is that they're probably wrong in one way, shape, or form, but we don't know why. And so we're just going to check even more frequently and adjust than before.
Yeah, and I guess even more important to have optionality built into your plans and into your strategy, so that you're not full steam ahead on one course of action that can't be at least adjusted, if not completely changed at short notice.
No, absolutely. I think the most sort of, forward-thinking folks have certainly planned that way.
And so what I want to do now is I want to bring on screen the results of a poll. And Colin, I'll put you on notice. I'm going to come to you first as I put these results onto the screen. We took a snap poll on LinkedIn just before and leading up into today's conversation. The question that we asked is, which of the following do you expect to have the greatest impact on procurement's results in 2023? We gave 4 answers, as LinkedIn is limited to in terms of the polls and the answers that you can provide. But the impact, the options that we gave were inflation or recession, supplier price increases, budget cuts, or lower internal demand for procurement services. As you can see there, just looking at the results, and I'm just going to read these out for anybody who may be listening to this in audio format afterwards. Inflation or recession finished top with 49% of respondents believing that this will have the greatest impact on procurement's results this year. Supplier increases were second at 30%. Budget cuts were third at 16%. and lower internal demand was fourth in 5%. Colin, do these results kind of resonate with what you're hearing? And of course, your experience within procurement.
Yeah, both for sure. I think this is, for people that have been in procurement long enough, they've seen these, the belt tightening and all the resulting, pressures that come on procurement as part of that. Do more with less, probably expect to deliver even more results despite maybe having flat or lower headcount. I think also, the interesting thing is we had sort of the 2 years of just such extreme growth, especially in software and a lot of related areas, that I think a lot of people, maybe you negotiated maybe an AWS contract that was based off of a certain amount of demand for the last year, and now you're coming into renewal realizing, hey, we've got to right size this thing. Like our demand is way down, or we have some specific work to do to get this just to the right benchmarks. So definitely a lot of pressure on procurement to deliver on all of those things. And I think also, a lot of suppliers are trying to figure out how they, are able to maintain their growth or get back to some of the growth they had in previous years. And they're trying to do that in an environment that is, lower headcount, lower spending, more pressure on procurement.
And Rujul, any immediate response that you see from those answers?
Yeah, I mean, I think to sort of add to Colin's points, there are certain macro trends that I think the changes over the last year have really accelerated, in many ways. And what this really shows too is just a greater need for, maximizing sort of the value and output of every dollar that procurement has, right? And so when you think about automation and business transformation, digital transformation for larger enterprises, we're starting to see much more acceleration, across all of those vectors because of these, candidly, the challenging times that we're in.
Yeah, and budget cuts, while third on the list, ultimately can be a driver of innovation because the work doesn't go away for procurement teams and for any team within the organization. This isn't just looking at it from a procurement lens. And so you have to find a way, and that perhaps opens up opportunities that may not have previously been considered.
Exactly. And getting that efficiency out of your people can come from a tool, right? It can come from a lot of different sources. And getting better controls on your spend, it can't be a manual process. If you're relying on manual steps, you're just talking about a headcount issue. So you've got to find the right solutions or the right tool for the problem, which is getting better control on your spend and getting, understanding where you are within those goalposts that Rujul mentioned earlier.
And on the bright side, I was just going to add too, is the procurement organizations that come out of this, having made those investments, are going to be so much stronger. Like, I think over the next 2 to 5 years, you'll actually see even more of a divergence in outcomes and capabilities between, the best sort of procurement organizations that have, invested in automation, that are running lean, and the ones that were sort of caught, behind.
No, that's what we talk about that a lot on Art of Procurement. We absolutely see the same thing. It's going to be a transformative time within procurement over the next, as you say, that 2 to 5 year time period. You're never quite sure what the time period is going to be, but that change, there's a lot of change that's going to happen, and it's going to be accelerated by the environment that we're going through at the moment. Kelly, you talk a lot about kind of following the news and the economic news just more broadly than just procurement perspective. Do these reflect kind of the broader trends that you're following?
They do. And what's interesting, and I actually hadn't thought about this until, Rujul, you made your point about different organizations making different choices about how to handle these things. I mean, you guys can call me on this, but I don't think there's a single thing in these selection options that is a surprise to anyone. So none of them are positive things necessarily, although they may have positive outcomes or silver linings from them. But we've seen all of these things coming for years in some cases. And so we're going to get this opportunity to look at how different organizations positioned, where they chose to invest, what worked out the best by company size, by industry, by maturity level. I think we're going to learn some interesting things about what companies and decision makers did with the information that they had in advance and how that factored into their overall thinking.
Now, I want to, if I bring off the poll there, I want to ask a question. We want to go into talking about the economy first of all, and just encourage if you do have questions or even comments on some of the trends that you see that you think will be impactful for procurement, please do pop them in that box, and Kelly will keep an eye on any inputs that we get. But I want to talk about the economy. We talked a little bit about the economy just around the context of those results. Rujul, are there any kind of high-level predictions, and I'll open this to you as well, Colin, afterwards, that you would like to actually make about the economy this year in 2023? Where are you kind of hanging your mast?
Yeah, I think everybody's clearly waiting for my answer. Of course I have no idea. I mean, I do think I think that, at least the change that we've seen from the CPOs and CFOs that we spend a lot of time with, there's and some of what we sort of spoke about earlier. I think folks have accepted sort of where we're at, and there's more. I do think there's less of, hey, let's just wait, see where things shake out, which I think was much more the theme early to mid last year, and it's more of, okay, this is how it is, this is the plan. Now let's just keep proceeding. But I think that, folks are cautiously optimistic, certainly about next year. And, I think somewhere in the middle about 2023. But Colin, curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think, again, not an economist. So my perspective here is sort of limited to what we're seeing from our customers and from our own experience. But I think similarly, you've sort of seen the last, hopefully the last tremors of the big shakeups at larger firms. And I think it's going to be a shift now from, okay, now we have the people on the bus that we want on the bus. How do we go forward from here and get back to growth and get back to, building whatever it is that is our core product and really executing. But yeah, it definitely felt like the whole, mid to second half of last year was a lot of churn for a lot of folks and a lot of people very badly impacted. But it feels like we're kind of rounding the corner on that. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be really interesting to see sort of how if there is sort of a stagnation, and if there is, if we stay sort of at a plateau for a while, coming out of what was a bit of a downturn last year, or if it starts to make another rally again.
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually recorded a podcast last week that's going to go live next week, and it was with a recruiter in the procurement space. And we were talking about how the headlines are kind of, dominated by a lot of the larger tech firms who are going through challenges right now and are going through layoffs and things like that. And of course, for anybody directly impacted by that, that's not a trivial thing. But then going deeper into different industries, that's not necessarily a trend that's reflected across industry. And so it's very kind of situational is his perspective. And that's definitely what I see. And you see the data every day tends, at least here in the United States, tends to be suggesting that things are going in a positive direction than a negative direction.
Yeah, for sure. And also, if you're in oil and gas, there's a huge amount of demand for people and procurement and supply chain managers. So yeah. It's very much a tale of two cities between some of the tech impacts and some of the non-tech impacts.
Now, how about from the supplier side? Are you finding that your clients are, we look back that poll and cost increases were still high in terms of the expectation of impact on procurement. Is that something that you're hearing, or are you starting to hear that that's subsided somewhat as, inflation, at least in the US, is starting to moderate?
Yeah, it's it's a sort of difference between direct and indirect spend. I think what we've seen from some of our customers, and in my role, I have a chance to talk with a lot of customers about their, not specifically related to Zip, but also just their general procurement process and what they're doing. And I think we've also seen a lot of people take advantage. Everyone knows this is a time of rationalization. People are, cutting the fat and, down selecting to single suppliers where maybe they would have used multiple in the past. So there's an opportunity to be a winner and, potentially to even grow your business with your customers if you're willing to sort of lean into the relationship and go resell yourself as the solution they should sort of down select into. If you're not willing to do that, you're going to go to zero and somebody else is going to get your portion of the business. So I think it's a pretty unique time for sales teams and for account managers and folks that are on the customer side to really identify where those opportunities are and be a little more aggressive and potentially win, even though there is macroeconomic headwinds.
Yeah, I think as a supplier as well, just broadly, not necessarily a supplier of procurement tech, but a supplier generally to an organization, through procurement, now is a really good time when you have a lot of uncertainty to really show what you can do as become a supplier of choice. And on the flip side, what procurement can do to become a buyer of choice. This is where a lot of relationships and strong relationships get formed, because you're needing to manage around the uncertainty and to maintain flexibility that goes way beyond what may be written in a contract. And I think for procurement teams, it's really important to kind of keep that in mind as well with how you're working with your suppliers. I'm not sure if that's Rujul, any of the conversations you've had with that you're having with CPOs, whether you're hearing that, oftentimes it was either cost cutting or build relationships, and there was no, you did one or the other from a procurement perspective. If now there's that recognizance of, I may have to do both.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that, now that we're, believe it or not, 3 years from the start of the pandemic, I think, that sort of, initial change in early to mid 2020, I think really compelled a lot of CPOs and procurement organizations to just be more resilient. And I think in some ways, like, I think this, understanding of the balance between relationship and, cost cutting and sort of all the core elements of procurement has, I think that the sort of best leaders actually have a couple of years of sort of having, for better or for worse, had to kind of go through this. It's not, unfortunately completely new, this year. And so I do think that, the ways of working and procurement's charter in many ways, as you say, has evolved to also really emphasize relationship management with suppliers.
And Kelly, I want to just come over to you and ask if there's any questions or comments that have come in from the audience today so far.
Yes, we've actually had some questions come in. One that just came in response, I think it was to your comments, Phil. You were talking about strategic supplier relationships. Marilyn wants to know if procurement should be rethinking or potentially even formally redefining the working definition of strategic supplier that we've used in the past. So Colin, maybe let me put that one to you first, and then Rujul, you can add in any thoughts once Colin's done.
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of hard to not think of any supplier as being strategic, right? This concept of strategic supplier is sort of being like your top tier one highest spend. I think some of the most interesting deals I've heard about recently from customers have been with maybe suppliers that weren't like the tier one. You've got so much effort and so much energy on those. There's not really any low hanging fruit. So, if you're thinking about going back to that same well to try and get cost savings or some sort of creative win, you're really not going to find it. It's just sort of tightening the bolts and getting small improvements. But if you think about your maybe tier two suppliers or some other creative suppliers that are in your supply chain, you're going to find a lot more opportunity, and you can probably be a lot more creative. So I think I think you've now got an environment where the business is actually willing to go to bat with you to try and get those wins, because they know executives care about cost savings. They know that there's kudos to be had for working with procurement to shave 20% off of a $500,000 contract, whereas in the past it may not have been as much of a focus.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, I think there's this, because of the macro changes and the poll results, there's this sort of downward or like push closer to the tail, farther and farther to drive savings, demonstrate ROI, and that really compels procurement to have visibility into an even larger sort of portion of spend, certainly on a volume basis, not necessarily dollar basis, earlier, and all of that just compounds this sort of need for automation and for being able to sort of really look at in real time, like what does the organization need, what do my stakeholders need, and where should I spend my time? What's valuable?
Yeah. And then, Phil, before I hand back to you, we actually have a specific follow-up question for Colin. This is from Francis. So, Colin, you mentioned direct and indirect spend. I think you called that out in an earlier comment. In your opinion, are you seeing that procurement teams are managing these spend groupings as differently as they have in the past? Or do you think technology and process have matured and become more sophisticated such that the way companies are managing, this is very high level, but these two types of spends or ways of dividing spend, have they come a little bit closer together?
Yeah, I'd say there's still a pretty solid divide for most companies between the two. The border's getting more blurry, I think, especially as, like certain types of software are ostensibly indirect, but they actually are directly impacting your core product and your core business. So it gets a little bit hard, like an ERP system. Like it's indirect technically, but like if your ERP isn't working, you may not have materials you need on time to deliver your core product. So it's a little bit of a fuzzier line than it's been in the past. And I think also, there's also good opportunities for better collaboration between the two. And I think you're also seeing more people go into careers and do both. I think historically there was people that were indirect procurement people, and there's people that were direct procurement people, and there was not much crossover. You were kind of one or the other. And I think we're now seeing that people are doing sort of the dance back and forth and bringing good ideas from both sides of the table to the other in terms of how they handle relationships and how they think strategically about their goals for a given year.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So Phil, I'll go back and continue monitoring questions, but back to you.
Thank you. No, and it's actually, I wrote a couple of things. One, Colin, what you were just saying about that direct and indirect. I've done both of those things as well. And there's so many transferable skills from one to the other that I went from direct to indirect. There's so many things around innovation and cost management and costing and things like that you can bring from a direct to an indirect. But from an indirect perspective, you have nuance and you have relationships and things that you don't necessarily see on the other side. So we talk to organizations all the time who are actually looking from how do I inspire my team who are in the direct materials space that they can actually do the indirects, because that's some fertile ground that we haven't really looked at before. So we see that as well. And the other thing I wanted to add to Marilyn's question, which is a great question about the definition of strategic suppliers, innovation can be anywhere. We used to think of innovation as being in the top quadrant. Well, the categories of spend that you historically may have thought of as being, that's just kind of a nuisance supplier. Well, actually, there's a ton of innovation that's going on in that space. You just need to kind of look for it and encourage it. So, agree with what you were saying there. I just wanted to kind of pop that out there. Now, I want to move on to experience as one of the trends for 2023. We did another recent AOP snap poll on LinkedIn, and user experience was the number one category of planned investment for 2023. We had about a third of respondents that said that when they were looking. We were asking about prioritization of investment within procurement this year. And I'd just love to understand from your perspective, because this is something that you were really involved in deeply, what are the greatest opportunities to actually improve the digital procurement experience? And Rujul, perhaps I'll pass that over to you first, and then Colin, again, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, user experience is it's something that's personally very important to me. It's in many ways why we really the reason why we started Zip. And it really all comes down to spend and procurement is getting more and more distributed in the world, right? Especially when you look at indirect and you have more stakeholders than ever. And that's true of people in the business that need services, they need software, they need other things to be able to do their jobs, but it's also all of your sort of peers in legal and in risk and in security and privacy, right? And all these IT, all of the sort of cross-functional collaborators and stakeholders that you have to work with every day. It's so important to be able to engage all of those folks across the business and make that process really easy. Because if it's easy, what we see is that procurement organizations for the first time ever sort of feel like they're swimming downstream. Because otherwise they're so used to swimming upstream, and everybody's, I think, been in the situation. All right, well, here's this contract that needs to be signed tomorrow, and like, how do I get help? And And then it's like, well, you can't be strategic if and that this person's emotionally tied to the vendor. Like it's just too late. And the best way to sort of get looped in earlier, and all of this ties to what we were talking about earlier about, sort of treating more suppliers like they're strategic and driving more savings. It all comes from getting looped in earlier. And the best way to do that is to not need to train anyone about anything. And the way to solve for that is user experience. I'll let Colin chime in.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of echo the same things, but I think it's just when you think about from the whole reason actually I joined Zip was because I recognized how bad the user experience problem was. And the vision that Rujul and Lou had in the early days was to fix that core problem. But I think what we've heard from over and over from customers, and I actually had one that really articulated this well, is there's this walled garden that we want people to come into to follow the procurement process. And if the front door is like got barbed wire and like booby traps all over it, and it's hard to get into, no one's going to come into that walled garden. You got to make the front door as inviting as you possibly can and as easy to access and as dead simple as you possibly can. And if you do that, you're going to get adoption, you're going to get higher compliance, and it's just going to make everything else run smoother in your procurement function.
Yeah, having a poor user experience, well, just a poor experience generally is a negative both for stakeholders and working with stakeholders, but also for procurement as well. Because as Rujul, you talked about stakeholders, like the number of stakeholders we have to deal with across the organization as procurement is exploding, as there are more people who are interested in making sure that the organization is doing what it should do from a risk perspective. But then what typically happens is procurement ends up being the quarterback for all these different touch points, but is seen as the single point of failure by everybody inside the organization, when it really becomes just, you're kind of coordinating between 10 different people on 10 different processes. But to a stakeholder, it looks like you're being the slow one and you're holding up all the process. And so one, it's difficult as a procurement pro because you don't really want to spend your life being that, doing the administrative function of following up on everybody, but then nobody wants to work with you for anything else because they just see you as being a problem.
No, 100%. I mean, that resonates so much. We see it sort of, across the board. And again, many reasons, part of the reason why we started Zip. And you're right. Like it's important to drive visibility so that it's clear that, hey, look, this is actually being blocked on. It's blocked because of the supplier. We're waiting on something, or which is frequently the case, or it's this part of the journey with IT that's actually maybe taking longer than it should, and driving that visibility actually helps improve the core process, because you actually maybe we need to get more resources into that function within IT or legal or wherever, right? But you can't actually sort of shine the light and then justify the investment or justify the headcount, which especially in the macro climate that we're in, I think everybody is looking to justify headcount even more than they have in the past, right? And having visibility and clarity into cycle times and where the choke points are is just more critical than ever.
And the procurement process, while we write it down on a piece of paper, it looks like it's exactly the same from every one organization to the next organization. The reality is that there's a lot of spaghetti that goes on in making that process in most organizations. So there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach to architecting what a good customer experience looks like from company to company or industry to industry. Now, one of the things that I'm really excited about for procurement tech generally, but specifically as we think about the stakeholder and the user experience, is the it's not really an advent, but it's an increasing number of no-code tools that are allowing you to customize ultimately the journey without needing to spend a lot of money on resources to build something that's really custom. For those who haven't come across the idea of no-code, Colin, I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about what no-code is and how, kind of the benefits that it's going to start to bring and that we're going to start to see across procurement tech of being able to leverage no-code solutions.
Yeah, I'll put the disclaimer out. I am not an engineer, so I'll give my best go here. But really, when you think about any sort of tool or any sort of product that's going to help, from a software perspective, your team, one of the biggest concerns we hear from customers and is also top of mind for a procurement leader is, okay, great, I can get this tool, I can get it stood up, but what's my overhead in terms of maintaining this thing? And because procurement processes are not static, almost more than any other process inside the company, your procurement process is constantly changing as you grow, as you evolve, as you sort of mature. So you need something that can stay real time with you. And if you're thinking of most older platforms, you're basically baking in like maybe a half a head count of IT resources to just help you keep things up and running. And if you want to make a change, that change is going to take probably upwards of a week to build, to test, and then to deploy live. No-code tools means that someone that's as untechnical as myself can go into the back end and just drag and drop things, and the logic is not coded. So you don't need to be a coder. You don't need to have any sort of software skills. All you need to do is understand what you want to change and make a change, and it's you can push it live immediately. So that's kind of at a layman's term what no code really means to us and why it's so critical for procurement tools. Because procurement, we're expected to do more with less. And so when you come with, hey, we're going to save some money, or this tool is going to make our team more effective, or we're going to improve the process, this much percent. If you've come with also an equivalent IT resource request, you're probably going to get told no. And that's really the game changer for no code tools.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to sort of add to that too is that without no code, right, and some of the legacy sort of software and systems that are out there, so much blood, sweat, and tears over so long goes into the initial implementation, and then the day that something goes live, so to speak, is the day that you start to see a divergence between like reality and just business process, and businesses mature and change obviously every year, and like systems, and if you have so much friction to change anything, whether it be a field or some logic or a condition or whatever in the workflow, you see so much like divergence just compounds, and then what happens is then you sort of get back into the situation of, well, all right, this process isn't working here. And then procurement becomes the shepherd, so to speak, of carrying the baggage of this divergence, and now you're back to sort of where you were. Yeah. And so the ability to have no code allows you to sort of take a much more iterative approach, an agile approach to making sure that the business is in like the software and the systems are really mapped to reality, right? Especially when we look at the macro changes and how much just volatility there is in the world. And so no code is just, it's not like, I don't view it as it's not like a one-step improvement. It's actually like a multi-step improvement in sort of magnitude change.
Yeah, I mean, no code has been a game changer on the marketing side for a long time. And, all the different workflows and automations and things like that you can start building into and have an almost infinite number of experiences based on very specific use cases that you can build yourself. You need the ability to know how to build it, which isn't that difficult because it's all drag and drop. So it's more around how you architect things. So I see no code as being a game changer as well for procurement, and how we're able to actually build experiences that are customized based on whether somebody is this person buying this thing with this stakeholder can have a very different experience than somebody else buying something else. And so that's definitely something to look out for 2023 across all procurement tech. Kelly, before I go into the last area of predictions, I just want to come to you and ask again if we've had any questions or comments that have come in.
We have, as a matter of fact, and right on this topic of no code, I want to bring in this question from Manish. He says, my IT team isn't sure no code is something they want us to have. How do we make the business case to them that this is the way of the future? So all these benefits and enormous changes that we're talking about, maybe some more risk averse or some more conservative IT teams are concerned that it's just too much change in the hands of non-technical folks too quickly. Rujul, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, it's really about ensuring that IT is looped into the decision, right? So to have no code, and looped into understanding where what the guardrails are, right? Because understandably, an IT person is going to be concerned if it sounds like you can make changes to the GL and your ERP, which of course is not the case, right? And so it's just making sure that there's there's clarity and transparency around what the bumpers are, and where to make sure that someone that's obviously non-technical like me or like Colin can't cause damage inadvertently, right? And so in any no code sort of system and zip, I mean that's a core value, and you sort of are always building for the user persona that's not technical. So it's really bringing IT along for that journey, and then making sure that it's clear, the ROI is clear, right? Because I don't think we've ever seen an IT department that was not overwhelmed with requests and across every part of the organization. And so these are resources that IT can save or repurpose to do something else. But I'll let Colin weigh in.
Yeah, no, it's exactly what I would have said. I think also the one other piece is also, we talk with a lot of IT teams, and part of what a no-code tool means is bringing the IT team into the conversation to make sure it lines up with your internal controls, and making sure you have the right permissions and the right controls in place in the no-code tool, so that it's not the Wild West, which is critical. Otherwise, you could get into a very bad situation. But I think that's early, and then like Rujul mentioned, it's a savings that they can realize. If they want to be in control, they can still be the admin, but it's going to be much less of a headcount burden for them.
Yeah. And then maybe starting with you, Colin, as we sort of wrap this general theme around customer experience, Tony says, when my stakeholders talk about customer experience, and I'm feeling air quotes here, Tony, it means how they want the process to work, not necessarily how the company or how procurement needs it to work. So is there a way that procurement teams can lead internal conversations about whether we're talking CX, customer experience, or UX, user experience, what it really means, so that everybody isn't just using it in the context of, well, it's how I think it should work or how it's convenient for me. Colin, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think this is the difficult conversation, is once you give people the flexibility of sort of, we're trying to improve customer experience, user experience, they can devolve into a bit of a wish list rather than what's actually necessary for the process. You do need to have that tension. There has to be some tension in the experience to ensure that you're doing the right things and following the right steps. So it's not anybody can set up a rubber stamp procurement workflow that's just everything gets green lit and it's fast and super easy. But it's about explaining to those stakeholders why the different steps exist within the process and what the potential pitfalls are if you don't follow the steps. And any logical person would understand that it's bad for the business to not have legal review on certain types of contracts. And then I think it's educating them and then bringing them into the process so that you can sort of work on it together to solve issues. And a lot of times in those conversations, you'll find things that are quick wins that actually don't impact the process, but you can give them, a yes to improve their personal wish list.
Yeah. Rujul, did you want to add a thought here?
Yeah, I was going to add, I absolutely echo what Colin said. And one thing I was going to add too is that one quick win we see that makes stakeholders happy, sort of improves cycle times, improves a lot of metrics across the board, is parallelizing as much of the process as possible. Right. And when you have visibility and you're doing more in parallel, again, you have to parallelize kind of the right things at the right point in time. It's the most transparent and kind of like the low-hanging fruit way to improve the process and deliver, a better customer experience, because certainly faster is always better.
Excellent. All right, Phil, I'll go back. If anybody has any last-minute questions, we may have a few minutes to come back to them at the end, so I'll keep an eye on those. But I'll hand back to you to talk about our next section.
All right. Thank you very much, Kelly. And the last section that we wanted to talk about was around business alignment. And business alignment, something, again, we talk about a lot of the time. But when we talk about business alignment, I feel like we're really talking about it from a context of what does the stakeholder want? What does the budget holder of somebody who's buying something? How do we align with them? Or how do we align with what the CEO's view of the world is, or the chief operating officer's view of the world? I'm going to ask this to you, Colin. Are we overlooking our internal peers across groups like data protection, privacy, IT, and how we align with those, and not focusing as much as we should there, and not over-focusing on the others, but kind of needing to do both?
Absolutely. I was guilty of this in my previous career in procurement. But I think one of the biggest reasons why is because most people lack the time or tools to actually get that alignment, specifically on individual requests. I think at a global level, you're going to talk to those folks and you're going to spend time with them understanding their pain points. And you maybe want to bring them into the process, but you already have so much pressure from the business and from requesters to do things faster that you may find yourself in a position where you just don't have the ability to properly keep everyone fully engaged in the process. And if you're using a manual process or something that's semi-automatic, you may be in a position where you just forget, like, oh, this should have gone to like data privacy. This should have gone to this small team that isn't involved in the process normally, but for this request probably should have been. And that's where, having the right tool that brings in the right people at the right time, that's not at the mercy of a human to say when they should be brought in, is enormous. And setting something like that up gives you the ability to know that you're not relying on your own memory to know when the right people should be brought into a given contract request, or any other sort of request that might come to the procurement team.
And to actually add to that, it's not just the automation that's critical; it's also the auditability of it, right? Like if you the example that Colin gave around data security, if you're relying on someone to remember that they need to loop in security, that's kind of a problem, right? It's almost like if you sort of look back 20 years and you look back to how and why SOX was created, and you look at all the software that's about 20ish years old that really companies use to enforce SOX. You can't imagine that it'd be okay to be like, oh well, I just have to remember to loop in the CFO because this is over $5 million. Like that's not okay. Like that's not SOX compliant. And if you look at how the world has changed, certainly in the last half decade, right? Data security, like these are concepts that matter so much more that were really non-existent 2 decades ago. And I have to imagine that in the next 10 or 20 years, like people will look back and be like, yeah, like, can you imagine? Like they would just like remember to loop in data security. Like there's got to be more regulation that will come around this. It doesn't maybe feel that way today, but it will come. And that's the sort of the way that we're headed. Right. And so I think auditability around all these cross-functional teams will only matter more tomorrow than it matters.
Yeah, I think from a regulatory perspective, and perhaps even in organizations where there aren't regulations, but there's obviously compliance requirements for audit purposes, the ability to ultimately executives and leaders of companies are being put in some cases have a legal and personal responsibility to be managing their providers in the same way that they manage their own the operations within their underneath their own roof. And that's so hard to be able to get any kind of control over that, especially at scale. But it's only going to become more and more important when you see failures and issues happening as the world kind of gets more focused on data privacy and topics like that. Then there'll be more imperative for you to be able to go back and audit and make sure you have consistency across how you're running a process. Now, let me see from a time perspective. The last question that I have, and then Kelly, I'm going to come to you to see if we've had anything else that's come in. Rujul, I just want to hear from kind of what you see on the ground, where you have these organizations where, previously perhaps there wasn't a great deal of alignment between business service functions, like procurement, like finance and accounting, infosec, data privacy, and then you find that you're creating a lot more alignment through the use of technology. What does that mean for procurement and its relationship with those business functions? Like, how are you seeing those relationships for those that have been through that journey kind of evolving?
It actually really helps, and we see this with customers in many ways, right? Because it actually forces the decision of, hey, like, when does security need to be involved?
Yeah.
And you sort of realize that, actually, like a lot of companies, a surprisingly, large portion of companies don't actually have like written out criteria. It's more of, oh, well, if it sounds like it's a software thing, they should probably approve it, right? Or like, is any data being shared? And but like, well, what types of data and like what type of review? Companies are all across the spectrum, on sort of how clear they are internally. And so I think this actually helps procurement sort of ask those questions and become, sort of what we see is be seen internally as a strategic leader, right? Like you're almost, procurement is sort of the hub, and these are all the different sort of spokes. And so it's a real opportunity for procurement leaders to, to really become more strategic to the organization, build the trust of their peers and colleagues and all of these, sort of cross-functional roles, and actually, make the hard decisions of, right, under these circumstances, this team and this review should occur, and get alignment there. And then to the earlier topic around no code, you're probably wrong in some way, shape, or form, and that's okay. You iterated.
Yeah, it's funny. I wrote down like strategic, not check the box. You're taking all these processes and making how you run these processes actually be a differentiator versus we've got to go through the privacy process. We've got to go through the InfoSec process. We've got to go through the procurement process. And, that's a matter of just checking a box because another process document somewhere says you have to do all these processes.
Yeah. I think also another sort of related to that, the rise of third-party risk management function within organizations, and also the extent to which we're seeing more and more third-party risk management fall under procurement's umbrella or working under the same leader, because they're so interrelated, and so much of your risk comes from your supplier vendor base. So merging those two functions together allows for a unified process that has that third-party risk management or vendor risk management closely aligned with the procurement process, because you can't do one without the other, and they really are kind of co-travelers.
So I know it's about time to start wrapping up. We promised to get everybody out of here by about 10 to the hour, I think. So Kelly, I just want to ask if there's any other questions or comments that you'd like to bring into the conversation.
There are, and I'll be super quick, but there's two that I really want to bring in. The first one, this is something I have not thought about. Elise, let me put the question up. She points out that despite, we're talking about third-party risk and internal process, she said, despite all this, it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of legal changes. I assume this means to like contract templates and that sort of thing. Despite all the disruption that we've faced, are you guys seeing companies making changes that maybe Elise and her team are overlooking, or have most of those standards and contract templates more or less stayed the same? Rujul, maybe come to you first on this.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can speak to the templates specifically, but what I can say is that, like, I think we read about data breaches, unfortunately, all the time. It sounds like, and so there's, it's almost like it's like you have to sort of get to more of a snowball, unfortunately, for if you look at regulation and for change to sort of drive that, right? I mean, obviously Enron was the impetus for SOX. And so I think, there hasn't been no equivalent to some degree around security, but like, I do think that unfortunately regulation lags. Because of the process that it takes. And so it'll take time, but you can see the indicators of it today.
Yeah. And then I know I'm squeezing in here, but last question, Colin, let me come to you. So when procurement talks about business alignment, as Sammy points out, usually that means who we want to work more closely with. But should we try to be a little bit more aware, a little bit more sensitive to who, either on an individual level or from a functional team perspective, is trying to align with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Short answer is a definite yes. And I think, kind of jumping back to what I mentioned earlier, but usually the limitation is just bandwidth and the ability to go bring in all the right stakeholders. But I think what we've seen at Zip is, as you roll out a tool that brings a lot of people in to collaborate, your ability to bring more folks in happens. It sort of becomes a little bit of, if you build it, they will come moment, where we have tons of customers that will launch, and then they immediately get like 3 teams that kind of come out of the woodwork that are usually just requesters and be like, hey, could we maybe put this in here? Or like, for requested or for this type of thing, can we slide them in? And for us, it's an easy yes, no code. Like we can throw those steps in there. But it's a great thing to see, because it sort of opens, expands the tent poles and really gets more people into the procurement process, and allows all the benefits that come with higher collaboration to really be extended to broader stakeholders.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Enlarging that stakeholder tent, right? Bringing as many people in as we can. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kelly. I want to thank, first of all, our audience for participating and sharing a lot of great questions and comments into the conversation. So thank you so much for that. Kelly, thank you for being the eyes and the ears of the audience today.
Absolutely. We had a great bunch of questions. We didn't even get to them all, but thank you to everybody who listened and watched and sent them in.
And Rujul and Colin, I want to thank you as well so much for joining us today, sharing some of your expertise and experience of what you're seeing and what you're seeing procurement leaders across multiple industries talk about as we're looking into 2023, and some of those areas that we can really focus on to essentially differentiate our value proposition. That's what we're trying to do, is really rethink the art of the possible for procurement, what we can do, how do we change those hearts and minds, and how do we make it as easy as we possibly can for everybody to kind of get what they need. So thank you again for joining us. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.